The second case that you need to know involving gerrymandering is the 1993 case of Shaw v. Reno. And while the previous case, Baker v. Carr, dealt with the size of the congressional districts, this one's going to be a bit more controversial because it involves the topic of racial considerations when drawing these districts. So this controversy stems from North Carolina, and the backstory is that North Carolina, for a large portion of its history, really didn't have a diverse representation in the House of Representatives. In fact, between 1865 and 1993, North Carolina had only elected a total of 7 African Americans to the House of Representatives. In 1990, there were 0 African American representatives from the state of North Carolina, despite the fact that African Americans made up more than 20% of the entire North Carolina population. So in 1990, because of reapportionment, North Carolina was actually awarded an extra congressional district, a 12th district. And the state of North Carolina decided that they were going to intentionally draw this new district to ensure the election of an African American representative. So they were going to draw the district in a way that predominantly included African American voters, hoping that by doing that, you would be able to sort of influence the election of an African American representative. So again, further backstory. One of the significant pieces of legislation that was passed in our country's history was the Voting Rights Act in 1965. And one of the things that this established was something called pre-clearance. States that had a history of discrimination had to get permission from the United States Department of Justice, that's overseen by the Attorney General, before they made any changes to their voting processes to make sure that they weren't attempting to make changes to discriminate against African Americans. Well, when North Carolina submitted its voting plan to the Department of Justice, they actually felt like it didn't go far enough. And the Department of Justice ordered the drawing of a second majority minority district, another district that would predominantly include African Americans. So it's majority minority because the minority group is put into the majority. They wanted a second group, second district that would predominantly benefit the African American voting population. And the district in question is this crazy kind of purple district right here, which is what they refer to as District 12. 5 white voters opposed this plan, saying that their 14th Amendment equal protection rights were being violated because they were being discriminated against because of their race. So here are the arguments. Shaw was one of these 5 white voters. The lawyers for Shaw argued that the shape of District 12 was way too spread out. It covered 160 miles. Also, they had argued that in 1960, there was a case called Gomillion versus Lightfoot, which had come out of Alabama. That case basically said that drawing districts based on race was illegal and was essentially segregation. And the other argument that Shaw's attorneys make is that this plan advances like stereotypes, that only African Americans would vote for African Americans. Reno was Janet Reno, who was the Attorney General of the United States, leading the Department of Justice, who was defending the drawing of these minority-majority districts. Reno argued that sometimes all these sheep districts are needed to accomplish a goal, and that's why this one was kind of crazy. You had to draw this to capture a predominantly African American population. And that Reno also argued that Gomillion versus Lightfoot, that case was not a good case to rely on, because that case was a case in which the state of Alabama was drawing districts to try and hurt the voting power of minority groups. That this was different because the districts were being drawn to help the voting power of minority groups. The decision was a 5-4 win for Shaw and the white voters. Supreme Court ruled that grouping people together over a large area that have very little in common except the color of their skin bears a strong resemblance to the concept of segregation. And that essentially racial classifications that promote that people should be judged by the color of their skin were wrong. So essentially, this Supreme Court ruling established that race could not be taken into consideration, even if it was helping a minority group in the drawing of these districts. That essentially these districts had to be drawn colorblind, and though that they can be drawn for partisan or political advantage, race could not be a consideration in the drawing of these districts.